Don't let her touch the food." The words were sharp, deliberate, meant to cut. Prudence, Pru Ashford, froze in the middle of Redemption Falls General Store, her hands resting on a sack of flour she had already paid for. Around her, the murmur of voices rose just enough to make sure she heard every word. "She buried 3 husbands," someone whispered, not bothering to lower their voice. "Poisoned them, every last one," another added. "Fat women like that always hide something rotten inside." A ripple of nervous laughter followed. Pru did not turn around. She never did. At 33 years old and 260 pounds, she had learned that meeting their eyes only fed the cruelty. Instead, she adjusted her shawl, lifted her purchases, and walked steadily toward the door as people shifted aside, creating space as if death itself clung to her skin. Outside, frost coated the wooden boardwalk, and the autumn wind carried the smell of pine and smoke. Redemption Falls looked peaceful to strangers. To Pru, it was a town that had already decided she was guilty of something unforgivable. 3 husbands, 7 years. That was all anyone needed to know. Edgar Ashford had died clutching his chest in their wheat field, his heart giving out after years of strain. Thomas Bell had been crushed when a spooked horse kicked him square in the ribs. Samuel Ashford, her last husband, had coughed himself to death during a bitter winter, pneumonia stealing his breath while Pru held his hand. All natural, all documented, all ignored. 3 dead men don't make coincidence, Judge Morrison had said at Samuel's funeral, his voice heavy with false sympathy. They make a pattern, and patterns make people nervous. People were beyond nervous now. They were certain. So Pru lived at the edge of town, in the small cabin Edgar had built before his heart failed. She'd survived by cooking, bread, pies, preserves, honest work that required no one to trust her beyond their hunger. Even so, only a few dared buy from her, leaving coins on the table rather than touching her hand. When fear needs a shape, it chooses the one who already stands apart. Guilt is easiest to assign to the woman no one wants to defend. That morning, as Pru trudged back toward her cabin, she sensed it before she saw it. Silence, the kind that falls when a stranger enters a town and everyone pauses to measure whether they should be afraid. 3 pack mules stood tied near the trading post, heavy with furs, and beside them stood a man so large he seemed to bend the space around him. Broad shoulders, long dark hair threaded with silver, a beard as wild as the mountains themselves. He wore the scars of survival openly, like medals he hadn't asked for. A mountain man. Pru lowered her gaze instinctively and kept walking. She was almost past him when he spoke. "Excuse me." Her stomach tightened. Slowly she turned. "Yes?" He studied her without the usual flicker of contempt or curiosity, just assessment. "You the one baking bread?" Pru hesitated. Yes." I followed the smell. His voice was deep, steady. "You selling?" She nodded cautiously. 2 bits a loaf? I'll take 6. That alone was enough to draw stares from the watching townsfolk. "And whatever else you've got ready," he added, "smells like something worth remembering." Pru blinked. "Most people don't care what others think," he finished. "Neither do I." A murmur swept through the onlookers. Someone laughed nervously. "Careful," a man called out. "That's the widow, the one who poisons her husbands." The mountain man turned slowly toward the speaker, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at Pru. "Did you poison them?" "No," she said quietly. "I buried them." He nodded once. That's not the same thing. The crowd went silent. The world had named her cursed, but sometimes fate sends a man who hears the lie and chooses her anyway. I'm Malachi Stone, he said, and I'm tired of bad food and worse people. How would you like to leave this town? Prue's heart skipped, fear and hope colliding in her chest. Leave, she whispered. Yes, Malachi replied calmly. Pack what you own. I'll be back at dawn. And with that, the mountain man turned away, leaving behind a stunned town and a woman whose life had just been cracked open. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. And if this story touches you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Now, let's get back to the story. Redemption Falls did not sleep that night. By dawn, everyone knew. The cursed widow's leaving. With him. The mountain man must have a death wish. Prue felt the weight of those words even inside her cabin as she packed the few belongings she owned. Clothes folded carefully, her mother's Bible, Edgar's old cooking ledger stained with flour and grease, Samuel's wedding ring still tied with a ribbon because she could not yet bear to put it away. Her hands trembled not with guilt, but with exhaustion. 7 years of explaining, 7 years of whispering, 7 years of being watched like a slow-burning fuse. She had survived by shrinking, by apologizing with her posture, by making herself useful and quiet and invisible. And now a man she had met only hours before had looked at her and said, "Leave, not escape, not hide. Leave." Outside, the town gathered as if drawn by instinct. Prue stepped onto the porch with her trunk just as Malachi Stone appeared at the edge of the road, leading his mules. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who did not expect opposition and did not fear it if it came. Sheriff Kane was the first to speak. "You sure about this, Stone?" he called. "You know who she is?" Malachi stopped, looked at the sheriff. "I know who you think she is. That woman's buried 3 men. "Yes," Malachi said evenly, "and none of them were you." A few nervous laughs broke out. Others shifted uneasily. Judge Morrison stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Stone, we can't stop you from hiring help, but you should understand the risk. Patterns like this don't happen without cause." Prue felt the familiar burn behind her eyes. She had heard these words too many times. Pattern, cause, curse. Malachi turned to her then. "Prue," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you ready?" She hesitated for half a breath. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to remain where the rules were known, even if they were cruel. Leaving meant danger. It meant uncertainty. It meant trusting a stranger. But staying meant death by 1,000 looks. "Yes," she said. That single word seemed to shock the town more than anything else. Temperance Watts scoffed loudly. "You'll regret it, Mr. Stone. You'll be number 4. Malachi paused. Slowly, deliberately, he looked back at her. "Perfect," he said. "I was never planning to live forever." The silence that followed was absolute. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is refuse to be afraid of the story everyone else believes. Malachi lifted Prue's trunk as if it weighed nothing and secured it to one of the mules. He offered her a hand to mount. She took it. The touch was firm, respectful. No hesitation, no revulsion, just contact. That alone made her chest ache. They rode out under the full gaze of Redemption Falls. No one waved. No one wished her well. A few spat into the dirt as she passed. Prue did not look back. The road into the Wind River Range was narrow and unforgiving. By midday the town was gone, swallowed by trees and distance. The air grew thinner, colder. Snow lingered in the shadows, even though it was only autumn. "You don't have to talk," Malachi said after a long stretch of silence. "But if you want to know the rules, I'll tell you." She nodded. "My cabin is 40 miles north, solid, isolated. You'll have your own room. You cook, keep house, preserve meat. I'm gone most days. I don't drink. I don't gamble. I don't bring trouble home unless trouble follows me." "And me?" Prue asked softly. He glanced at her. "You work. You're paid. You're respected. That's it. You're not afraid?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Malachi considered her carefully. "I've lived alone 15 years because people decided I was something I wasn't. Fear loses its power after that. Those who have been misjudged recognize one another without needing proof. They stopped once near a stream to eat. Malachi handed her bread, and cheese without ceremony. He waited until she took the first bite before eating himself. A small thing, but it lodged in her chest. By nightfall, the mountains rose around them like sentinels. The cabin appeared just as darkness settled, large, sturdy, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. "This is home," Malachi said, "if you want it." Prue dismounted slowly, taking in the place. No whispers, no watching eyes, only wind and pine and quiet. "I want it," she said. Inside, warmth wrapped around her, a fire already burning, space, order, possibility. For the first time in years, Prue set her things down without feeling like she needed to justify her existence. The world saw only her weight and her grief. He saw a woman worth choosing and chose her in front of everyone. That night, as Prue lay in a clean bed, listening to the wind outside rather than the judgment of a town, fear finally came. But it was different now, because for the first time it came with hope. The mountains did not welcome Prue gently. They tested her from the first morning. Cold seeped into her bones before dawn, sharper than anything Redemption Falls had ever offered. The air was thin and clean and unforgiving, biting her lungs as she stepped outside the cabin for the first time alone. Pines groaned softly in the wind, and somewhere far off, something howled, low and steady, not a threat so much as a reminder. This land did not care who she had buried. It did not care what people whispered. It only cared whether she could endure. Malachi was already awake, moving quietly near the woodpile. He nodded once when he saw her, acknowledgment without expectation. "Breakfast when you're ready," he said. "No rush." No rush. The words unsettled her more than the cold. In Redemption Falls, everything had been urgency. Prove yourself, explain yourself, defend yourself. Here, time stretched wide and indifferent. The day would unfold whether she justified her presence or not. She cooked as instinct guided her. Dough kneaded slow and steady. Coffee strong enough to cut through sleep. Meat warmed carefully, not wasted. When Malachi sat down, he did not speak at first. He simply ate. Then he closed his eyes. Prue froze, waiting for disappointment, for correction. "This," he said quietly, opening them again, "is the best thing I've tasted in years." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hand so he would not see it. When a woman has lived too long under suspicion, even praise feels dangerous. It asks her to hope. Days settled into pattern. Malachi left early, returning near dusk. Prue cleaned, cooked, learned the rhythms of the cabin. She discovered where he stored tools, how he preferred his gear mended, which shelves were safest for heavy jars. He never hovered, never corrected her unless she asked. Trust, she realized, was being given to her without ceremony. The cold outside was relentless. Inside, the cabin grew warmer, not just from the fire, but from presence. Blankets were left folded where she might need them. Extra wood appeared stacked closer to the door. A stool was placed near the counter so she could sit while working long hours. He never mentioned these things. She noticed all of them. One afternoon, as snow began to fall in earnest, Malachi returned earlier than usual. His jacket was dusted white, his beard rimmed with frost. "Storm's coming," he said. "Might be here a few days." Pru nodded. "Then I'll bake more." She did. Bread, pies, thick stews, meant to last. The cabin filled with warmth and smell, pushing the cold back inch by inch. Malachi watched her work from the table, silent. "You don't ask many questions," she said finally. "Neither do you." "I've learned questions make people suspicious." "I've learned they make people lie," he replied. They shared a look then, not intimate, not yet, but understanding. That night, the storm hit hard. Wind battered the cabin. Snow slammed against the shutters like thrown gravel. Pru woke once, heart racing, instinct screaming danger. She sat up, listening. Footsteps moved softly below. She wrapped a shawl around herself and went to the stairs. Malachi stood by the door, rifle in hand, watching the cracks of the world beyond. "You didn't have to stay up," she said quietly. "I know." "You think someone's coming." "No." He glanced at her. "But if they did, they'd have to come through me." The words were simple, not a promise, a fact. She returned to bed with her heart pounding for a different reason entirely. Safety is not silence. It is the knowledge that someone is listening while you sleep. As weeks passed, Pru changed without noticing at first. Her shoulders lowered. Her voice grew steadier. She stopped flinching when Malachi entered a room. She laughed once, soft, surprised by the sound, and did not apologize for it. Malachi noticed. He began staying longer after meals, sitting by the fire while she worked, listening as she talked about recipes, about Edgar's ledger, about the small dreams she had once had and buried along with her husband's. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked one evening. "No." "Why not?" "Because up here no one tells me who I am." He looked at her. "Same for you." The storm cleared, leaving the world stark and brilliant. Snow glittered like broken glass. The air smelled sharp and new. Malachi insisted she come with him to check the near traps, not far, just enough to see the land. She was nervous. The mountains were beautiful, but they were vast, easy to get lost in, easy to disappear. He walked slightly ahead of her, breaking trail, slowing when she slowed. When she slipped, his hand caught her elbow, steady and brief. "Careful," he said, not unkindly. "I am," she replied, embarrassed. "So am I." They stopped near a ridge overlooking the valley. The view stole her breath. Endless trees, snow-capped peaks, no sign of town or judgment. "I didn't know places like this existed," she whispered. "They exist," Malachi said. "Most people are just too busy being afraid to look for them." On the way back, the cold bit harder. Without a word, Malachi draped an extra blanket around her shoulders, tucking it close before she could protest. Her hands stilled. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, as if this were nothing at all. Trust is not built by grand declarations. It is built when a blanket appears before the cold is named. That night, Pru dreamed of redemption falls, of voices calling her name, of ropes and accusation. She woke with a gasp. The fire was low, the cabin quiet. Then she saw him. Malachi sat in the chair near the hearth, eyes open, watching the dark. He looked at her instantly. "You're safe," he said. The words broke something open in her chest. She nodded, unable to speak, and lay back down, sleep coming easier than it ever had. By the end of the month, the truth was impossible to ignore. Pru no longer counted the days since she had buried her last husband. She counted meals shared, storms survived, mornings she woke without dread, and Malachi, who had lived 15 years alone, found himself returning home with something like anticipation. Neither spoke of love, but both felt it taking shape, slow and dangerous and real, like fire beneath snow. Love does not arrive loudly. It arrives as the quiet fear of losing what you never expected to keep. When Malachi finally said one evening, "You belong here," Pru felt tears spill down her face without shame. "For how long?" she asked. He met her gaze, steady as the mountains outside. "As long as you choose to stay." And for the first time since the first husband died, Pru believed she might. Winter closed around the cabin like a held breath. Snow layered the roof until the beams groaned softly at night. The creek slowed to a whisper beneath ice. The world narrowed to a circle of firelight, wood smoke, and the steady work of staying alive. Inside that circle, Pru and Malachi built a life so ordinary it felt miraculous. Mornings belonged to Pru. She rose before light, tied her hair back, and coaxed the stove awake. Bread dough waited beneath a cloth, patient and forgiving. She worked it with practiced hands, feeling strength return to her body in a way she had not known in years. Cooking had always been her skill. Here it became her language. Stews thickened slowly, beans softened. Pies cooled on the sill until Malachi came in from the cold and closed his eyes at the first bite, as if remembering something he thought he had lost. He never reached for food before she sat. "You don't have to wait," she told him once. "I want to," he replied, and that was the end of it. Healing rarely announces itself. It arrives in habits that make a woman feel seen without being studied. Afternoons were quiet. Malachi disappeared into the trees to check lines or repair fences. Pru kept the cabin. She scrubbed floors, mended clothes, sorted stores for winter. She learned the weight of the place, where drafts slipped in, which shelves could bear jars of preserves, how to read the sky through the narrow window above the sink. She added small comforts without asking permission. A cloth runner on the table, a chair pulled closer to the fire, a pot kept warm on the stove so he could eat the moment he returned. None of it was extravagant. All of it mattered. Malachi noticed. He always noticed. He lowered hooks so she wouldn't have to stretch. He split kindling smaller, stacked closer to the door. He repaired the loose stair tread she had learned to step over. When she thanked him, he shrugged, as if these were simply corrections the world had needed all along. Evenings softened them both. They sat by the fire with work in their hands, him sharpening tools, her shelling beans, or stitching. Silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like rest. When the wind howled, Malachi checked the shutters without being asked. When Pru's hands ached, he wordlessly took the heavier work. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he answered. "I want to." The words stayed with her. One night, the temperature dropped so sharply that breath smoked indoors. Pru woke shivering, the old fear tugging at her chest. She sat up, pulled on a shawl, and found Malachi already awake, feeding the fire. "You should sleep," she whispered. "So should you," he said. He draped an extra blanket around her shoulders, careful not to crowd her. She let it stay. Gentleness is not the absence of strength. It is strength choosing restraint. Weeks passed. The cabin filled with the evidence of living. A basket of socks by the hearth, a ledger opened to a new page, mud tracked in and cleaned away again. Pru stopped apologizing for taking up space. She moved through the cabin like someone who belonged there. Malachi watched the change with a quiet awe that surprised him. He had not meant to need this. He had meant to hire help and keep his distance. Instead, he found himself listening for her footsteps when he returned, noticing the lift in his chest when the window glowed with firelight. He found reasons to come home earlier. One evening, as snow fell in thick silence, Pru struggled with a stubborn log. Malachi stepped in, showing her how to set the axe, how to let gravity do the work. His hands hovered, then steadied hers when she asked. The log split cleanly. She laughed, surprised and bright. He smiled without thinking. That night they spoke more than usual, of small things at first, of recipes, of the way snow changed sound, of the strange peace that came with isolation. Then, gently, of the past. "I don't miss the town," Pru said, staring into the fire. "I miss the idea of being safe there." "You were never safe," Malachi replied quietly. "No," she agreed. "I was tolerated." He nodded. "Up here, you don't have to be smaller to survive." She met his eyes. "Neither do you. Sometimes love begins not with desire, but with relief." It was Malachi who named it first. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said one evening, voice steady but low. Pru went still. The room seemed to narrow. "Malachi, I know what people say," he continued. "I know what you've lost. I know what I risk. I'm not asking you for anything. I just won't pretend this isn't happening." Fear rose sharp and immediate. "I've loved before," Pru whispered, "and every time I buried it." He did not touch her. He did not interrupt. "I can't watch another man die because he chose me," she finished. Malachi considered her with the patience of a man who had waited 15 years for something to matter. "If loving you shortens my life," he said, "then it gives it shape. I'd rather live fully and risk the end than survive empty." Tears slipped down her face. "What if I am cursed?" "Then curse me," he replied. "I'm choosing you anyway." She reached for him then, tentative and trembling. He held her as if she were something precious and breakable, not something to fear. They did not rush. They did not hide. Love does not ask permission from superstition. It asks only for courage. They married in January. There was no crowd, no spectacle, a traveling preacher, 2 trappers passing through, snow falling softly as vows were spoken. When Malachi kissed her, it was with open devotion, as if daring the world to object. Nothing happened. Life did not end. Instead, it began to deepen. Spring came slow and muddy. Pru discovered she was pregnant and cried in Malachi's arms. Fear and joy tangled tight. He held her belly with reverent wonder and promised nothing he could not keep, only that he would stay. Their daughter Grace arrived on a cold night with the help of Pru's steady hands and Malachi's unshakable presence. When he held the baby, tears soaked into his beard. "She's alive," he whispered as if surprised. "So am I," Pru said. For 2 years, peace held. Grace learned to walk on uneven floors. Pru's cooking drew trappers from miles away. Malachi guided and traded. The cabin expanded room by room as if growing with them. Happiness settled, not loud, not careless, but real. Then, one autumn morning, hoofbeats cut through the quiet. Just when the flower begins to bloom, the storm returns to test its roots. Men from Redemption Falls stood at the edge of their land, official, grim, certain. Pru felt the old fear rise, but this time it did not rule her. She took Malachi's hand and did not let go. The men did not dismount. They stayed on their horses at the edge of the clearing, as if afraid the land itself might reject them. 5 riders, clean coats, familiar faces sharpened by authority rather than kindness. Redemption Falls had finally followed her. Judge Morrison rode at the front, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling concern. Beside him sat Sheriff Kane, jaw set, eyes already searching for weakness. Malachi stepped forward before Pru could move, placing himself between the riders and the cabin without ceremony. "You're trespassing," he said. "State your business and leave." Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone, we're here regarding a death." Pru's stomach dropped. "A woman named Martha Henley," the judge continued, 93 years old, passed 3 days after purchasing bread from your wife." Malachi did not look back at Pru. "People that old die every week? Doc Hastings believes arsenic may have been involved," Sheriff Kane said. "And given Mrs. Stone's history, we felt it prudent to investigate." There it was. History. Not facts, not evidence. A story they had been waiting to finish. Pru stepped forward then, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Martha Henley was frail and ill for months. She bought bread from me dozens of times without incident." "Which makes you the last person to feed her," Morrison replied gently. "You understand how this looks. Prejudice rarely shouts. It speaks softly, wearing the mask of reason." Malachi's hand moved, resting casually near his rifle. "You want to accuse my wife of murder on my land, you better bring more than how it looks." "We're not accusing," Morrison said. "Not yet. We're asking Mrs. Stone to come back to Redemption Falls for questioning, voluntarily." Pru knew what that meant. Voluntary until it wasn't. "What happens if I don't?" she asked. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Then we'll be forced to assume guilt and issue a warrant." "And hang me," Pru said quietly. No one denied it. Malachi turned to her, eyes dark with fury and fear. "We're not doing this." Pru squeezed his hand. "If we run now, they'll hunt us forever. Grace will grow up running." "And if you go with them," he shot back, "they'll hang you, whether you're innocent or not." Both were true. Conflict does not always arrive with gunfire. Sometimes it arrives with choices where every path bleeds. They rode back to Redemption Falls under guard, Pru seated rigidly beside Malachi, Grace left with a trusted trapper friend in the mountains. Every mile felt like moving backward through time, trees thinning, air thickening with memory. The town greeted them with grim anticipation. Whispers bloomed like rot. "She's back." "Knew she'd kill again?" 4th time didn't take long. The hearing was held in the courthouse, packed beyond capacity. Pru sat beside Malachi, his massive presence the only thing keeping her from shaking apart. The prosecution built its case on implication. 3 dead husbands, 1 dead customer. A convenient narrative wrapped in fear. Doc Hastings testified that arsenic poisoning was likely, not certain, likely. Witnesses spoke of rumors, of feelings, of patterns. When Malachi's lawyer, a young man from Denver named Robert Finch, stood to speak, the room was already leaning toward verdict. Coincidence is not evidence, Finch argued, nor is reputation. Mrs. Stone has fed this community for years without harm. The doctors who attended her husband's have all confirmed natural causes. What you are seeing is not murder. It is misfortune amplified by prejudice. The jury did not look convinced. Pru watched their faces and understood something with crushing clarity. They did not want the truth. They wanted certainty. And she gave it to them. When a community fears randomness, it invents monsters. The verdict came quickly. Guilty. The word struck like a physical blow. Judge Morrison raised his gavel. "Prudence Stone, you have been found guilty of criminal poisoning. I sentence you to—" "No." Malachi rose. The sound of his chair scraping back echoed like a gunshot. "You will not sentence her," he said, voice calm and lethal, "because she's leaving with me." The courtroom erupted. "Sit down," the judge shouted. Malachi did not move. "You want someone to blame because death scares you. So you chose the woman you already hated. But I've eaten her food every day for years. My child has eaten it. If she's a poisoner, we should be dead." "That proves nothing." "It proves everything," Malachi cut in. "It proves you're cowards." Sheriff Kane reached for his gun. Malachi's rifle came up just enough to be seen. Silence slammed down. "You'll have to kill me to take her," Malachi said evenly, "and you won't like the cost." The judge's face went pale. "Leave," Malachi finished, "or live knowing you tried to hang an innocent woman." No one moved to stop them as Malachi took Pru's hand and walked her out of the courthouse. Fear followed them, anger, shame. They rode through the night, collecting grace and heading deeper into the mountains than they had ever gone before. By dawn, Redemption Falls was gone. So was the life they had built. Pru wept quietly as the sun rose. "We lost everything." Malachi pulled her close in the saddle. "No, we chose each other. Sometimes love does not save you from exile. It simply gives exile meaning." They rode north, fugitives by judgment, innocent by truth. Behind them, warrants would be written, posses would form. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the fragile hope of a place where no one knew her name. But they rode together, and for Prudence Ashford, no longer cursed widow, no longer scapegoat, that was worth the price. They did not stop riding until the horses foamed and the mountains closed in around them like a shield. By the second night, the air thinned and the paths narrowed into tracks only Malachi knew how to read. Redemption Falls lay far behind, but its shadow did not. Pru felt it in every snapped twig, every echo that lingered too long. They were being hunted. Malachi said it without drama as he checked the ridgeline at dawn. "They'll form a posse, sheriff first, then men who've been waiting years for an excuse." "For me," Pru said quietly. "For certainty," Malachi corrected. "You're just convenient." They made camp in a high basin ringed by rock and pine, a defensible place, limited approaches. Snow still clung in pockets, even though spring had begun to soften the lower valleys. Malachi worked quickly. He set snares not for animals, but for warning. Cleared sight lines, built a low breastwork of stone and fallen timber. He moved with the calm of a man who had done this before and survived. Pru watched, then joined him. She boiled water and brewed a thick, bitter tea she knew would steady nerves and dull pain. She checked Grace first, then Malachi, as methodically as she had ever checked an oven or a ledger. "You don't have to help," he said. "I won't hide," she replied. "Not again." True strength is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to shrink when fear arrives. By mid-morning, they heard it. Hoofbeats, not many, 3, maybe 4. Malachi lifted his rifle and motioned Pru back behind the stone. She did not argue. She placed Grace down and kissed her hair once, then steadied herself. The riders appeared cautiously at the tree line. Sheriff Kane led them, jaw tight, eyes searching. 2 men from town flanked him, rifles held too high, nerves obvious. "This is as far as you go," Malachi called. "Stone," the sheriff answered. "You're harboring a convicted murderer. Hand her over, and no one gets hurt." Pru stood. She stepped into view before Malachi could stop her. "I am not a murderer," she said, voice carrying clearly. "And you know it." Kane hesitated, just a fraction, enough to tell Malachi everything. "You're scared," Pru continued. "Not of me. Of the idea that Martha Henley died because she was old and sick. Of the idea that my husband's died because life is cruel. If I'm guilty, then the world makes sense again." "Get back," Malachi warned softly. She did not. When a woman speaks the truth without begging, it unsettles those who depend on lies. A shot rang out, not aimed at Pru, not at Malachi. It struck the rock at their feet. A warning. Malachi fired back, precise and deliberate, shattering a branch inches from the shooter's head. The message was clear. The posse scattered for cover. The standoff stretched, brittle as ice. Then one of the men shouted, "They're coming around!" Malachi moved instantly, circling to cut off the approach. Pru grabbed the shotgun and held her ground, heart pounding but steady. Another shot, a scream. The fight was brief and ugly. Malachi wounded one man, drove the others back with accuracy and restraint. He did not pursue. He never did. When it was over, the silence rang louder than the gunfire. Sheriff Kane emerged slowly, hands raised. "This ends now," he said hoarsely. "You can't keep running." Pru stepped forward again. "We're not running. We're leaving you." Kane looked at her, really looked, and something in his face shifted. "If you don't come back, warrant stand, you'll be outlaws?" "Then write them," Malachi said. "But you won't take her." The sheriff swallowed. "I won't bring more men here, not today." "Good," Malachi replied, "because next time it won't end like this." Kane nodded once, turned, and led his men away. The hoofbeats faded. They did not celebrate. They packed. They moved deeper, higher, into places no posse would follow without paying dearly for it. Days passed in careful travel. Nights were kept watchful. Pru learned the feel of the land, the sound of danger, the way Malachi thought 3 moves ahead. They crossed a high pass at dusk, the world opening into a hidden valley below. Water, shelter, game. Malachi stopped. "We can make something here." Pru looked at Grace sleeping against her chest, at the mountains standing like sentinels. "Will they ever stop?" "No," he said honestly. "But they'll get tired." She nodded. "I can live with tired. Love does not end the chase. It teaches us where to stand when it comes." That night, by a small fire, Malachi took Pru's hands. "I won't promise safety." "I don't need it," she said. "I need you to stay." "I will." They held each other while the fire burned low, listening to the quiet of a place that had not yet learned their names. Spring found them slowly, not with celebration, but with permission. Snow loosened its grip in stages, retreating from south-facing slopes first, then from the high rocks where Malachi had built their new shelter. Water ran again, thin at first, then laughing as it carved paths through stone. The valley they had chosen remained hidden from any easy trail, a bowl of pine and meadow that asked only one thing in return for safety: vigilance. They learned the valley together. Malachi set boundaries the way he always had, by walking them, memorizing lines of sight, listening to the way wind carried sound. Pru learned where the ground stayed dry after rain, where roots grew best, where the sun lingered longest. She cooked with what the land offered, careful and inventive, turning scarcity into routine. Grace took her first steps on uneven earth, laughing when she fell, unaware that her parents held their breath at every sound beyond the trees. At night, the fire burned low and steady. They spoke less of redemption falls now, less of courts and warrants and men who needed monsters to make sense of their fear. Those things still existed, but distance had softened their edges. "Do you regret it?" Malachi asked one evening, watching the last light slide off the peaks. Pru thought carefully. Regret had been a companion for years. She knew its weight well. "I regret that the world needed a villain," she said. "I don't regret refusing to be one." He nodded. "I regret that I couldn't give you certainty." She smiled faintly. "Certainty is what condemned me. Home is not where danger disappears. It is where fear no longer dictates who you are allowed to be." They built without haste. A larger hearth, a door that sealed tight against winter, shelves for preserves and tools, space for Grace to grow without being taught to shrink. Each beam and nail carried the quiet insistence of permanence, even as they knew permanence could never be promised. Sometimes riders passed far below, shadows on distant trails. Malachi watched, counted, waited. The riders never came closer. "They'll test us again," he said once, not as warning, but as truth. "When?" Pru asked. "When they forget why they were afraid." She understood. Fear had driven them once. Boredom would bring them back. Until then, life insisted on itself. Pru's bread rose reliably. Her hands grew sure with new herbs, new cures. Malachi guided travelers who came by chance and left by choice, careful to keep names unspoken. Grace learned the valley as children learn, by running, by touching, by trusting the ground to catch her. One afternoon, Pru found Malachi standing at the ridge, staring toward the far horizon. "They're building a railroad," he said. "Far south, not near us yet." "Yet," she echoed. "They'll come with maps," he continued, "titles, lines drawn on paper." She joined him, taking his hand. "Then we'll decide again." He looked down at her, searching. "You're not tired of deciding?" "I am," she said honestly, "but I'm done letting others decide for me. Freedom is not a place reached once. It is a choice made repeatedly, often at a cost." That night, the valley filled with stars. Grace slept between them, breath soft and sure. Pru lay awake, listening to the land, not for danger, but for change. "What if they never stop?" she asked quietly. "Then we keep living," Malachi replied. "We make ourselves hard to take." "And if it ends badly?" He turned toward her, expression steady. "Then it will have ended honestly." She nodded. Honesty, she had learned, was rarer than mercy. In the weeks that followed, word reached them in fragments. The warrants still stood, but the posse had dissolved. The sheriff had been voted out. Judge Morrison had taken ill. Another widow had lost a husband in Redemption Falls, and the town had discovered, uncomfortably, that death did not need Pru Ashford to keep its schedule. The story shifted. Not enough to absolve her, enough to confuse them. Confusion, Malachi knew, bought time. They used it. They planted. They stored. They taught Grace the names of trees. They taught each other patience. One evening, as the fire settled into coals, Malachi said, "If you wanted to go farther, north, west, I'd follow." Pru shook her head slowly. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because this place hasn't asked me to prove anything," she said. "I'd like to stay where I'm not on trial." He smiled, the kind that came rarely and meant much. "Then we stay. The open ending is not uncertainty. It is agency." Morning came clear and cool. Pru stepped outside, breathing in pine and water. The valley lay quiet, waiting. She felt the familiar twinge of fear and let it pass through her without taking root. Inside, Malachi stirred the fire. Grace laughed at nothing at all. The world beyond the mountains still argued about her guilt, still told stories to make itself comfortable. Here, the only story that mattered was the one they chose to keep writing. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories like this don't belong to one place or one time. They travel, from frontier cabins to modern rooms, from wounded hearts to listening ears. Somewhere, someone knows what it feels like to be judged before being known, to be blamed for things they did not choose. If this story reached you, tell me, where are you listening from in the world? And if you still believe that love can stand against fear, gossip, and injustice, don't leave yet. The next story is already waiting for you.